All right, hello. Let me just pull up my slides and then we'll get started. All right, well, hello everyone. I hope you're having an amazing whatever time you're watching this video. My name is Nevin, and I chose to do my final presentation over mental health issues in juveniles. Now, one of the big reasons I did this is because of the disproportionate amount of juveniles in the juvenile justice system that have underlying mental health conditions. It is an estimated 70% of the kids in the juvenile justice system have these mental health conditions. That's over 17,000 children at any given period of time in the United States. And this is according to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And so this number is ginormous. It's very concerning. And I want my presentation to be able to address why this is and how we can solve it. So just a little overview of what we're going to be going through today and a little introduction to myself. Hi, I'm Nevin. I'm a pre-law mathematics and history major at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm currently taking this class as a part of my victimology minor. I'm also just really interested in mental health and how that interacts with different social, political, and legal institutions. And the reason I specifically chose juvenile justice for this research project and presentation is because I'm on the debate team at UNL, and one of our prior research topics was criminal justice. So I had to do a lot of research in juvenile justice specifically for that topic. And so I really just see this project as building upon that prior research. And so we're going to be going over three specific topics during this presentation. First, we're going to be going over what is juvenile justice, because you need to know what juvenile justice is to try to see how we can solve the mental health problems in it. So a simple definition is the juvenile justice system is the justice system set up specifically to deal with minors who commit crimes. It has some unique differences from how adults go through the criminal justice system, as children are both biologically and socially different from adults. Second, we're going to go over the juvenile mental health problem, the disproportionate amount of children who suffer from mental health issues, and also why those disproportionalities exist in the first place. And then finally, we're going to go over solutions. How can we address the mental health issues in the juvenile justice system and what we need to do to get rid of them? So first, let's break down who has control over the juvenile justice system. So there's the federal, state, and judicial level. So first, for the federal level, the federal government has very limited control over juvenile justice. They take very limited amount of children. According to the National Center for Juvenile Justice, only about 200 kids every year are ever processed by the federal government, and they're usually tried as adults, not as juveniles, because there is no federal juvenile justice system. That's because state law gets to decide how they treat their juveniles in a juvenile justice system. They get to set the laws according to their state preferences, although they must abide by the few federal regulations. There's also some federal funding for following certain expert-based practices that they should also follow if they want that funding. And although each states do have their own thing, there are a lot of similarities, as we will talk about in just a second. And second, there is case law set by courts throughout the country that apply to their specific jurisdictions. And according to the Supreme Court, which obviously the Supreme Court's jurisdiction is the entire country, all state juvenile justice systems must follow its precedent. In two cases in particular, Henry Galt was a case that built upon a lot of other cases that pretty much guarantees most due process to minors. Previously, minors had very few due process rights, and the Sixth and Fifth Amendment were seen to only apply to adults. But Henry Galt applied those standards to children as well, guaranteeing them the right to an attorney, the right to a trial, a right to ensure the state must prove the charges beyond any reasonable doubt, and things like that. A second case was Roper v. Simmons, which abolished the death penalty for people who are under 18 years old. And before Roper v. Simmons in 2001, individual states could decide whether or not they were able to execute minors who committed certain crimes, in particular murder. So now we're going to talk about some of the commonalities because, as I mentioned, states do get some differences and they do have some differences in like procedure and structure, but they do have overall same things when it comes to the goals of doing things and some common laws throughout the states. First of all, is the population that the juvenile justice system addresses. Obviously, it's addressing minors. Now, I did include a little asterisk in this because all states do allow minors to be tried as an adult. And so they are then taken out of the juvenile justice system and tried as adults and face the same punishments as adults. This practice can be considered controversial because children aren't adults, so it doesn't necessarily make sense to everyone that they should receive the same punishments as adults. But that's a different topic for perhaps another day. And then the goal of juvenile justice systems tends to focus more on rehabilitation rather than punishment, especially when compared to adult criminal justice systems. It's far more about getting children reintegrated back into society so that they become productive, good citizens as adults. And then they also address like criminality differently in juvenile justice. You refer to it as delinquency or status offenses rather than getting like convicted of criminal charges. This also allows a lot of adults in all 50 states are allowed in most or some circumstances to expunge records of criminal misconduct while they're minors going through the juvenile justice system. That also can depend on whether or not it was delinquency, which is a crime that could be committed by anyone regardless of age, such as like murder, assault, theft, things like that, versus a status offense, which are crimes that are only legal while you're a minor. This could be underage drinking, things like that, things that are only legal when you're under the age of 18, or in the case of drinking, under the age of 21. And then confidentiality is also something that's kind of controversial or different in different states. Specifically, 27 states do not allow like the public to view juvenile justice trials that are going on, whereas the other remaining states do allow the public to view these juvenile justice trials. This can be seen as controversial because most people would agree that some children deserve like privacy, even if they are going through the juvenile justice system. Because the public is sometimes allowed to view some of these trials, that can take away these children's privacy in these matters as well. Now that we've gone over what the juvenile justice system is, I now want to talk about the mental health impact of that system. In particular, we've already talked about the 70% of juveniles that have mental health disorders, but in particular, I want to compare this to just the general adolescent population, of which only 18 to 20% in general suffer from mental health disorders. This is according to the Yale School of Medicine. And so, as you can see, there's about 50% discrepancy between the average population and the population of juveniles, showing a clear problem that needs to be addressed uniquely to juveniles, not just all youth, but unique solutions to help juveniles. And then, even though things like incarceration for children are increasing, you can see in the graph that's published by the Census on Juveniles that since 1997, there was over 100,000 juveniles in detention on any given period in a year. Whereas in present day, the last statistics taken were in 2021, that has dropped to 25,000. So even as we get better in addressing things like incarcerating children, it clearly hasn't solved the disproportionate amount of mental health disorders in these children. And then a huge impact of this is suicide. Children in juvenile justice going through that system are far more likely than the average adolescent to commit suicide, according to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And so, through a study published and peer reviewed by the Word Journal of Education, there are three main perspectives as to why there is a disproportionate amount of mental health issues in the juvenile justice system. So, that first perspective is a clinical perspective. What this means is they're taking like a psychological approach to why this is caused. Particularly, they believe that because children with mental health disorders are more likely to show signs of anger, unmanageability, hostility to the police, that can cause police to be more likely to detain them and therefore increase their chances of going through the juvenile justice system rather than someone without a mental disorder who might not display these characteristics and will have a less chance of getting detained and put through the juvenile justice system. And because of this detainment, that is what leads to the disproportionate amount of children with mental health disorders being represented in the juvenile justice system. The second perspective is the socio-legal perspective. So this perspective argues that legal changes are the result of a disproportionate amount of people with mental disorders in the juvenile justice system. In particular, they believe in the recent history increases in certain mandatory sentences. Although we did talk about detainment decreasing, there's an array of other forms of mandatory sentencing that still cause mental health issues. This includes probation, house arrest, mandatory like education facilities. Due to like probation, house arrest, detainment, and mandatory education facilities, many of these places do not allow easy access to mental health treatment. And so if these people enter the justice system, and then because of mandatory sentencing, whether that be probation or they're trapped in their house or they're detained, they can't receive proper mental health treatment. That's only going to cause mental health treatment to spiral and increase the disproportionality of the people who have mental health issues in that system. They also argue that these mandatory sentences, such as detainment, probation, house arrest, can cause trauma to these children, which will just create new mental health issues they did not previously have before entering the juvenile justice system. This brings us to our final perspective, which is the intersystemic perspective. This perspective holds that multiple social, political, and legal institutions and systems are overlapping to cause a disproportionate amount of mental health issues in the juvenile justice system. So in particular, the people who hold this view believe that the decrease in available, cheap, affordable, and public mental health services are a huge cause of this. And that leads to people who are in like poverty or lowly funded communities do not have easy access to mental health treatment, to psychologists or to psychiatrists who can give them like medication they need. And because they can't get treatment, they can't get medication, they can't even sometimes don't even know if they have these underlying mental health conditions. That's going to increase the chance that they are arrested, detained, and enter the juvenile justice system. Another factor that could be out there is family life. People who live in abusive households, people who live in households that are not necessarily safe for them, also increase the ability for them to have mental health issues. And all of these factors, the economic factors of poverty, the social factors of your family life, and the lack of available mental health treatment centers all come together and increase the likelihood that they will enter the juvenile justice system, leading to the disproportionate amount of people with mental health issues in juvenile justice. And then even within the already disproportionate amount of people in the juvenile justice system, there are still even more disparities, particularly among race and gender. In race, young people of color, when compared to their white counterparts, are far less likely when they are outside the juvenile justice system to get treatment. And this is what leads to an increased likelihood that young people of color are likely to get detained and put through the juvenile justice system, unlike their white counterparts. And even once they have entered the juvenile justice system, they're less likely to receive care than their white counterparts. This is particularly based on a study still from the World Press Report that's been peer reviewed. And what that study did is it looked over a bunch of other studies and compiled them. And overall, those studies did show racial bias in who gets mental health treatment in the juvenile justice system. And then they did the same type of study, but instead for gender. And what they found is that young girls are more likely to receive mental health treatment than boys. And they're also more likely to get referred while they're in the juvenile justice system. And the main reason they found over all of these studies was that girls are more likely to report that they are feeling mental health issues rather than boys. And so the specific about girls being more open, that comes from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Once again, they specifically ran a survey of young girls in the juvenile justice system and young boys and found that girls were more likely to be open about their mental health. So now I'm going to play you a little video. This video actually is about children in specifically in Orleans, New Orleans, who are in the juvenile justice system right now, and they talk about addressing mental health and some solutions they came up with.
Stories about teens involved in crime in New Orleans, but rarely do we hear directly from the teenagers who are involved. Tonight, we hear their voices.
Students at the Travis Hill School, that's inside the New Orleans Juvenile Justice Center, they recently participated in a competition. They competed against students across the country, and they won.
And their work is giving us a window into a world that's mostly unseen, one that could help New Orleans stop crime before it happens and change the path of our city's youth. Here's Whitney Miller.
It takes a village to raise a child. Like, no child should be left unneeded.
Behind the walls of the New Orleans Juvenile Detention Center are voices trying desperately to be heard.
I was living life fast. I was living life because I was running from emotions.
Emotions these teens say got them caught up in the juvenile justice system.
It's okay to have emotions. You don't need to use drugs to run from your emotions. That's normal. It's normal to cry. It's normal for males to want to just scream like that. It's okay. Like, whoever told y'all that that's not man enough for you to cry, don't believe them.
These are some of the tough lessons the young men and women enrolled in the Travis Hill School have had to learn.
My situation was very hard. And yeah, it took for me to have a sit down, but this sit down changed my life. Like, I look at life in a whole different lens. And the streets not it.
Now off the streets and behind bars, this group of young people are working towards rehabilitation.
We understand how it is to feel alone, depressed, stressed, and things like that. And our parents go through these things every day.
They say their parents and their peers have at some point or another dealt with mental illness, an issue they say is sparking violence and unrest in their communities.
Because our parents suffer with mental health, and like our community experiences and just life experiences, like we know how it is to like deal with mental health.
They use that knowledge to help them brainstorm a solution.
What we want to try to tackle is we want to tackle the problems that adults face before it spreads to the children.
They call themselves the Voices Behind the Walls, and through a nationwide competition called the Aspen Challenge, these teens created a comprehensive plan to address mental health.
Most of our difficulties and problems and things like that is because parents they're not more of a communicating to their children, and it's just a lack of ability to need to know what's going on in the community and between their household.
They named their idea Ladders to Success. It addresses topics like financial literacy, therapy, grief, and trauma.
We, as incarcerated youth, are behind these walls, but we feel like since the community look at us as whatever they label us as, all these different stereotypes, we know who we truly are behind these walls, and we feel like we could step up and we could voice how we really feel.
The first team that's winning the first place prize, they're not here with us today.
This is Travis Hill. That was a happiness that I ain't felt in a long time. Like, you can feel the happiness in the room.
School principal Chanel Dowling says the win highlights just how capable these young people are.
The journey was a process. The journey required them, and it challenged them to think. It required that they reflect on their own personal and lived experiences. But with their tenacity, with their grit, with their hustle, they can do anything.
I hope that the community hear our cries of what's going on. Like, I hope the community see us for who we actually are and not who our situation portrays to be.
In New Orleans, Whitney Miller, Eyewitness News.
Big congratulations to them. Great stuff. Well, this restaurant,
All right. Let me just get back to full screen.
Stories about teens involved in crime and
All right. So now we're just going to talk about some solutions, both some that were mentioned in that video, along some that were mentioned by a mental health study done by the World Press, once again, that peer-reviewed study. And so specifically for solutions, you saw in the video, they talked about financial literacy. This goes to the economic solutions. Obviously, poverty is a huge cause of mental health problems and the lack of being able to afford proper mental health treatment. So more funding for public mental health programs, more funding for programs in the juvenile justice system to ensure that all youth, both before and after they may enter the juvenile justice system, have access to equitable mental health treatment to address any conditions they may have. Second are social solutions. Like I mentioned in the video, they need to be able to have open conversations. People should be able to express their emotions, express their pain. There needs to be less stigma, especially around children and teens suffering from mental health issues, because you can't address an issue before you're able to talk about it. And then we also need legal solutions. We need to continue this decrease in the incarceration and detainment of children, like that trend is already going. We need to continue to do that and find more alternatives, such as more mental health programs, more community programs to reintegrate these people into society and to make sure they have the care that they need. And we also need, even if they are incarcerated or if they are in the juvenile justice system, for them to be able to receive proper mental health care while they're in the system, whether that be court mandated mental health care or whether that just be providing access to that care. Because if these juveniles don't have access to that care, there's no way we're ever going to be able to solve or lower the 70% of minors who suffer in the juvenile justice system from underlying mental health conditions. So without these economic, social, and legal changes, I suspect this number will continue to stay the same as it has stayed relevantly the same throughout the past decade. And that's why we need to address this change, because if we do not address this change, children will continue to suffer, whether it be from depression, whether it be from anxiety or suicidal ideation, and that can cause extreme harm, obviously, ultimately perhaps leading to suicide or leading to just more interactions with the juvenile justice system, or once they become adults, just more interactions with the criminal justice system. If we want to make people's lives better and have less interactions with the criminal justice system, we need to provide resources to ensure people with mental health issues are not being unfairly targeted and have the exact same chance as everyone else to participate in society. And then just some final thoughts. Because the juvenile justice system is a unique system meant to address children and recognizes that they are different from adults, we should also recognize the currently disproportionate amount of children in that system who suffer from harm and mental health issues. And that's why we need to find these solutions, whether they be economic, social, and legal, because if this just goes unaddressed, another issue that we just throw under the rug, children are going to continue to suffer, and we should at the very least be able to protect one of the most vulnerable populations in our society. And other than that, thank you so much for listening to my presentation. And then here is a list of all of my citations. They do all go in order. I labeled them throughout the slideshow with what sources I used. I also mentioned them verbally. And then for all the pictures I used, those were all just copyright-free pictures. And so there are no citations for those. And then other than that, once again, have a good whatever time frame you're watching this video in. Thank you for watching.